Have you ever wondered if the life you are living is truly yours, or if you have simply been placed on a board that was set long before you arrived? Most people move through life believing they are making independent choices, but what if every step, every reaction, every fear, and every impulse is actually a programmed move inside a much larger design? This is where the game begins, not on the surface where everyone is distracted, but in the hidden layers beneath your ordinary awareness. And once you see this, you cannot unsee it. Life is a board, but not the kind you play casually on a weekend. This one shapes your identity, your beliefs, your emotional patterns. You think you are choosing your strategies, but the board often chooses first. It rewards certain behaviors, punishes others, and conditions you to repeat the same moves endlessly. People call this fate, luck, or personality, but it is really unconscious gameplay. And the uncomfortable truth is that most people are not players at all. They are pieces being moved by forces they never learned to recognize. The first shift happens when you stop assuming the board is fixed and start questioning the unseen rules that hold it together. Why do you react the same way to the same situations? Why do certain people trigger you instantly? Why do opportunities feel unevenly distributed? These are not accidents. These are indicators of a strategy running in the background, one you never consciously designed. And if you have felt the quiet suspicion that something in your life is operating beneath the surface, you are already closer to the next layer of the game than you realize. You have probably had moments when the script cracked a little, moments when you sensed that your choices were not fully yours, that your emotional patterns were borrowed, that your identity felt more like a costume than a truth. You may have dismissed those moments as overthinking, but they were glimpses of the board revealing itself. And this is why understanding the hidden structure is the smartest strategy to finally win, because you cannot master a game you do not understand. Have you ever passed through a season of life and suddenly realized it was shaping you more than you were shaping it? You have, whether you admitted it or not, and this is exactly why your presence here matters. Because once you begin to see the mechanics of the board, you stop moving blindly and start playing consciously. Now tell me, have you ever felt the sense that life was pushing you instead of you pushing life? If so, share your experience in the comments. Your perspective is part of this exploration, and engaging with it helps you understand this content more deeply. And while you're here, leave a like to support the channel and make sure you're subscribed so you do not miss the next moves unfolding ahead as we continue exploring the layers of this board and what happens when you finally learn to shape it instead of being shaped by it. Long before you ever made a conscious decision, the board had already begun shaping the way you played. The game started in the subtle moments you barely remember, the tones of voices around you, the expectations placed on you, the reactions people had to your smallest expressions. These early impressions became the foundation of the strategy you now call your personality. And what is most fascinating is that this strategy was not created by deliberate choice, but by adaptation to an environment you were too young to question. The game begins the moment a child interprets the world not as it truly is, but as it must be in order to survive within it. Some learn that being quiet keeps the peace, others learn that being loud earns attention, and others discover that disappearing emotionally protects them from disappointment. These are not conscious moves. They are instinctive responses, yet they become lifelong strategies unless interrupted by awareness. Without noticing, you inherit a script that decides which emotions you are allowed to feel, which desires you are permitted to pursue, and which parts of yourself must remain hidden. This is precisely why most people believe they are in control of their lives, when in reality they are repeating ancient patterns, reenacting the moves that were programmed into them long before they understood they had options. The board does not announce itself. It conditions you quietly, making its rules feel natural, obvious, unquestionable. You grow up believing that your tendencies are simply who you are, when they are actually the first layers of a strategy built for you, not by you. If you look closely, you can trace many of your current choices back to an earlier version of yourself still trying to navigate emotional landscapes that no longer exist. The game teaches you to respond to shadows as if they were real players, to avoid risks that once felt threatening but no longer hold any power, to repeat, moves that once protected you but now limit you. And the strange thing is that you rarely notice the moment when these unconscious strategies become obstacles disguised as personality traits. Understanding this is like turning on a light in a room you have lived in your entire life. You begin to notice structures that were always present but never examined. And as the outlines become clearer, so does the possibility of playing differently. When you realize the game started without your permission, you also realize something else. You do not have to continue playing with rules you never agreed to, and it is precisely here that a new awareness begins to rise, the kind that allows you to step toward the deeper mechanics still waiting beneath the surface. As you look deeper into the board, you begin to notice that your moves are rarely spontaneous. They arise from internal pieces you did not know were positioned within you, each one formed by past experiences, emotional imprints and subconscious associations that operate quietly beneath your awareness. These pieces act like invisible forces, shaping the direction of your decisions before your conscious mind even enters the conversation. It is almost unsettling to realize how often the mind justifies choices that were made long before thought appeared. Every internal piece has a function. Some are protectors, attempting to shield you from risk or rejection because they remember a time when vulnerability felt dangerous. Others are achievers, pushing you constantly forward because they were taught that worth must be earned. Some pieces carry fear, others carry longing, and some carry old narratives that no longer match who you are becoming. And what is most intriguing is that these pieces do not work alone. They respond to one another like players following a silent choreography that repeats itself without question. This internal logic explains why you sometimes feel torn between two impulses that seem contradictory. One part of you wants to advance boldly into new territory, while another pulls you back with warnings of what might go wrong. These are not random emotions. They are the movements of distinct pieces inside you, each trying to secure a position on the board according to rules learned long ago. The conflict you feel is simply the tension between competing strategies operating simultaneously. Yet, the moment you begin to witness this internal system instead of being governed by it, something shifts. You start to see how predictable many of your reactions have been, how automatic your decisions felt, how deeply certain beliefs have rooted themselves in your identity. And with this awareness comes the realization that these pieces, although powerful, are not fixed. They can be understood, repositioned, and even transformed as you learn to observe them without judgment. The invisible logic of these internal movements has always been present, guiding your choices through patterns that seemed instinctive, but were actually conditioned. And once you recognize this intricate system operating within you, the next step becomes unavoidable. Discovering how these pieces interact with the grand structure of the board itself, and what shifts when you finally see the connection between your inner world and the game unfolding around you. There comes a moment when the illusion of separation begins to dissolve, and you realize you are not just a player observing the board from the outside. You are woven into it. Your beliefs shape its angles, your emotions color its pathways, your wounds carve its boundaries, and your desires expand or contract the space you move in. The board is not a static structure you walk across. It responds to you, shifts with you, and mirrors the patterns you carry internally. This is the point where the game becomes far less about external moves and far more about understanding the architecture of your inner landscape. You begin to notice that the board rearranges itself subtly every time you shift your emotional state. Fear narrows the board, making options appear limited and dangerous. Confidence widens it, revealing paths that seemed invisible only moments before. Old memories reshape certain squares, making them feel heavy or unreachable, while new insights illuminate areas you never dared to explore. This is not metaphorical. It is the lived experience of every person who suddenly recognizes that their external life has always been an extension of their internal blueprint. Once this awareness emerges, you start to see patterns you previously dismissed as coincidence. The same types of relationships appear repeatedly. The same challenges echo through different chapters of your life. The same emotional reactions surface even when circumstances change. It is here that the realization deepens. The board is reflecting you, not trapping you. It shows you the pieces you have refused to examine, the strategies you have outgrown, the fears you still negotiate with, and the strengths you underestimate. Every movement around you reveals a movement within you. This shift can be disorienting because it dismantles the comforting narrative that life is happening to you. Instead, it confronts you with the understanding that life is happening with you, responding to your state of consciousness, moment by moment. And as you recognize yourself as part of the board, you begin to sense the possibility that the game has never been about survival, performance, or perfection. It has always been about awareness, alignment, and the courage to see yourself clearly. And now that this recognition has surfaced, something essential becomes possible. An honest dialogue between your inner world and the structure you move through. That dialogue is subtle, but once it begins, it changes everything. As you move deeper into the structure of the board, you begin to uncover rules you were never consciously told, yet you have obeyed your entire life. These rules do not appear in words, instructions, or teachings. They form silently through observation, emotional repetition, and the subtle pressure of belonging. You learn early what is acceptable to feel, what is inappropriate to express, which dreams are encouraged and which ones are quietly dismissed. These unwritten rules become the invisible framework of your behavior, guiding your steps long before you realize you are following something at all. Some rules are inherited from family patterns, shaping how you navigate conflict, affection, ambition, or vulnerability. Others emerge from cultural expectations, telling you what success should look like or how you should position yourself in the world. And some arise from your own survival instincts, forged in moments when you felt unprotected or unseen. Each rule becomes a filter through which you interpret every challenge, relationship, and opportunity, making the board appear predictable even when it is not. What makes these rules so powerful is that they disguise themselves as truth. You do not question them because they feel familiar, and familiarity is often mistaken for wisdom. You hesitate to take risks because the rule says stability is safer. You filter your words because the rule says your authenticity may cost you connection. You hesitate to dream too boldly because the rule says you should not want more than what life has already offered. And without realizing it, you begin playing the game with boundaries that were never chosen consciously. Yet the moment you observe these rules clearly, they lose the authority they once held. You begin to see how they influence the strategies you use, the fears you repeat, and even the relationships you attract. The board expands when you challenge a rule, but it contracts the instant you follow one blindly. This is why two people in the same situation can experience entirely different realities. One is confined by rules they never questioned, while the other has learned to step outside them. As the deeper patterns reveal themselves, you start to sense that the game is far more flexible than it appeared. The rules you once assumed were universal begin to look optional, and the boundaries you believed were fixed begin to loosen. This shift prepares you for something far more transformative, the realization that mastery does not come from following the old rules more effectively, but from learning when to break them and what emerges when you do. There comes a pivotal moment in this inner game when you stop focusing solely on the pieces you have been trying to maneuver your entire life. The habits you repeat, the emotions you negotiate with, the patterns you try to break, the goals you chase, the relationships you attempt to fix or avoid. These pieces seem crucial at first, demanding all your attention, but eventually you begin to sense that rearranging the pieces without understanding the board beneath them only leads to temporary progress. You may change a behavior, but the same outcome reappears. You may shift your environment, yet the same emotional patterns resurface. This is the sign that the real movement needs to happen somewhere deeper. The turning point arrives when you recognize that the board itself responds to your level of consciousness. When you elevate your awareness, the board reshapes itself in ways that previously seemed impossible. Instead of fighting against old limitations, you start dissolving the perspective that made those limitations feel real. The struggles that once felt heavy lose their weight, not because the external world changed, but because you are no longer navigating it from the same emotional position. You stop playing reactively and begin playing intentionally. It becomes clear that every piece you tried to move externally was actually waiting for an internal shift. When you release a belief that has been holding you in place, the board expands. When you confront a fear that shaped your worldview, the pathways open. When you let go of a pattern that once protected you but now restricts you, the entire matrix adjusts. This is not metaphorical. It is the lived experience of anyone who has stepped into a higher state of awareness and watched their reality reorganize in response. At this level of the game, power no longer comes from controlling circumstances. It comes from controlling your interpretation of them. You begin to understand that the outer world reacts to your inner alignment with more precision than you ever imagined. And with each internal shift, the board becomes more transparent. You see the illusions that once guided your moves. You sense the deeper motivations behind each piece. You realize that influence comes not from force, but from clarity. As the board starts to follow your internal movement rather than the other way around, something fundamental changes. You stop feeling at the mercy of life and start sensing that life is responding directly to the shape of your consciousness. And once this awareness settles, you cannot help but approach the next layer of the game differently, because now you know that the real transformation happens not where people usually look, but where they rarely dare to examine. As your awareness expands, something unexpected begins to happen. The behavior of other players becomes strikingly clear. You no longer see people as random, individuals making scattered choices. You see patterns, strategies, fears, and unconscious rules playing out in real time. It becomes obvious that most people are not losing the game because they are incapable, but because they are unaware of the forces shaping their actions. They believe they are making conscious decisions, yet their moves are predictable, almost scripted, driven by patterns they never learned to question. You observe how many players react instead of respond. They move impulsively, driven by emotional triggers planted long before adulthood. They repeat the same conflicts in different relationships, expecting different outcomes. They chase validation as if it were a form of currency, unaware that the board shifts every time they abandon themselves to please others. You begin to see the exhaustion behind their achievements, the fear behind their confidence, the longing behind their detachment. It becomes clear that most players are fighting battles that have nothing to do with the present moment, but everything to do with the internal pieces they refuse to examine. And then you notice something even more revealing. The majority of players are so focused on individual moves that they never stop to look at the structure of the game itself. They compete without understanding the real stakes. They compare themselves to others without realizing everyone is playing with a different internal map. They measure success using rules that were handed to them, never checking if those rules align with what they truly value. Their suffering does not come from the difficulty of the game, but from playing it unconsciously. When you see this clearly, compassion begins to replace judgment. You understand that people are not difficult, broken, or irrational. They are simply unaware of the board they are standing on. They keep repeating the same moves because awareness has never interrupted their momentum. And this recognition changes the way you interact with them. You stop expecting people to see what they are not yet ready to see. You stop taking their reactions personally. You stop carrying responsibilities that are not yours to carry. Instead, you move from clarity rather than confusion. This shift not only frees you from unnecessary battles, but also sharpens your strategy. When you understand how others play, you no longer get caught in their loops. You navigate interactions with a sense of calm detachment, aware that their moves say more about their internal board than about you. And as this understanding deepens, the next layer of the game begins to reveal itself. As you continue observing the game from this new perspective, a subtle shift occurs. You begin to understand that the true difference between those who constantly struggle and those who move through life with clarity lies in a quiet strategy almost no one talks about. It is not about controlling every situation or predicting every outcome. It is the ability to remain internally still while the board moves around you. This inner stillness is not passive. It is a form of awareness that allows you to respond instead of react, to choose instead of repeat, to move with intention rather than momentum. Most players spend their lives caught in emotional turbulence. They react the moment something touches an old wound or threatens their sense of control. Their attention is consumed by external noise, making every setback feel personal and every challenge feel like proof of inadequacy. In this state, the board becomes chaotic, full of imagined threats and urgent impulses, and because they cannot separate themselves from the movement around them, they remain trapped in endless loops of predictable behavior. The player who wins understands something different. The board is not the enemy, and the movements of others do not define their path. Instead of chasing control, they cultivate clarity. Instead of trying to manipulate outcomes, they learn to observe the forces shaping the moment. This creates a form of inner spaciousness, where decisions are no longer emotional reactions, but deliberate responses aligned with a deeper understanding of the game. From the outside, it looks like calm confidence, but internally, it is precision born from awareness. This silent strategy also reveals that many battles are unnecessary. The player who reacts fights everything. The player who sees clearly chooses when and how to move, understanding that not every challenge deserves energy, and not every invitation to conflict requires acceptance. They conserve emotional resources, protect mental focus, and allow only the meaningful battles to shape their path. This is how momentum is built without force, and how progress becomes a natural result rather than a desperate pursuit. As this strategy becomes more familiar, you start noticing how different the board feels when you are no longer pulled by every emotional current. Situations that once triggered anxiety lose their power. Patterns that once trapped you begin to dissolve, and opportunities that previously felt invisible start to appear with surprising clarity. It becomes evident that winning the game is not about overpowering others, but about mastering the internal field that shapes every move you make. This shift sets the stage for an even deeper realization about influence, alignment, and the kind of awareness that transforms not only how you play, but how the entire board responds to you. As your awareness matures, something fundamental changes in the way you perceive results. What once seemed like luck, randomness, or divine timing begins to reveal a pattern that has been forming quietly beneath every choice you have made. You start to see that outcomes are not isolated events, they are the natural consequences of the internal structure you have been building. At this stage, the board stops feeling unpredictable because you finally understand that the game was never designed to surprise you, it was designed to mirror you. The players who remain unaware experience life as a series of disconnected moments. They celebrate wins without understanding why they happened, and suffer losses without realizing they contributed to them. Their success feels temporary, and their failures feel personal. But when you rise to this new level, you notice that every result aligns seamlessly with your beliefs, your patterns, your intentions, and even your unspoken fears. Nothing is random. Every outcome is a reflection of the strategy you have been using, consciously or not. This recognition gives you a sense of grounded power. You no longer wait for external validation, nor do you fear sudden loss or unexpected change. Instead, you begin shaping your inner world with the understanding that the outer world will eventually adapt. Small internal shifts create subtle changes in the board. Consistent inner alignment generates outcomes that match your state of mind. What once felt out of reach begins to appear naturally, as if the board is rearranging itself to accommodate your new level of clarity. You also notice a fascinating pattern. When your internal alignment is strong, resistance fades. Doors open with less effort. Situations flow instead of strain. People who resonate with your new level begin to appear almost magnetically. This is not coincidence. It is coherence. The board responds to inner order the same way water responds to gravity, moving toward balance with remarkable precision. And when something does not manifest, it is no longer interpreted as failure, but as evidence that alignment is still forming. At this stage, you stop focusing on outcomes entirely. Your attention shifts to maintaining clarity, strengthening intention, and observing the subtle movements of the game without forcing anything. The board responds with increasing accuracy, revealing opportunities that once seemed invisible. You understand that mastery is not about predicting the future, but about shaping the inner conditions that allow the future to unfold with purpose. And as this understanding deepens, you approach the final layer of the game, the one where strategy dissolves into awareness, and the player begins to influence not just the moves, not just the board, but the very essence of the game itself. At the highest level of awareness, the game no longer feels like something you are trying to master. Instead, it becomes an extension of your inner state, adjusting itself in real time to the quality of your presence. You begin to sense that your thoughts, emotions, expectations, and clarity all influence the board far more than external strategies ever could. The moves you once agonized over now feel effortless, because they arise from a place of internal alignment rather than fear or confusion. You no longer force outcomes, chase validation, or react to every shift around you. The board bends toward the shape of your consciousness, and the game transforms as you do. In this space, you recognize that winning was never about outperforming other players. It was about outgrowing the version of yourself who believed the game was hostile. The fears that once anchored your moves lose their authority. The doubts that once dictated your pace dissolve into clarity. You start acting from intention instead of insecurity, from awareness instead of impulse. And because your internal landscape has changed, the board responds with a new configuration, one that reflects who you have become rather than who you used to be. You also notice that life begins to communicate with you differently. Patterns feel clearer, signals feel stronger, synchronicities appear with uncanny precision. The game is no longer random. It becomes a dialogue between your consciousness and the unfolding reality around you. And the more you stabilize this awareness, the more fluid the game becomes. You stop trying to control outcomes and instead participate in a deeper movement that has always been guiding you even when you could not perceive it. This level is not about perfection. It is about presence. It is about moving with life instead of resisting it, sensing the subtle guidance within each shift, and trusting that the board expands every time you expand your awareness. When you reach this layer, strategy becomes simple. Stay aligned, stay aware, stay honest with yourself. The board will follow. And if you have reached this point of the video, it means something in this message resonated with your own game, your own inner board, your own shift in consciousness. So I want to invite you to stay connected with this journey. If the reflections here added value to your understanding of life, consider subscribing to the channel so you can continue exploring these deeper layers with me. And leave a comment with the phrase, "This message was for me," or another reflection that came to you along the way. It helps expand this conversation and lets me know you walked with me until the end. If you feel that this video brought clarity, a simple like is enough to strengthen this connection. And there is another video right here on the side that complements everything we explored today. Click and continue walking through this board with me as we unfold the next layers together.